The War and Peace Report, I'm Amy Goodman, and we're broadcasting from the Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah. We turn now to a new film that looks at the struggles of public defenders, lawyers who dedicate themselves to representing the poor. In some states, it's estimated 80% of people facing felony charges cannot afford to hire their own lawyers. Often the lawyers appointed to handle their cases are faced with overwhelming caseloads and virtually no resources. The problem's especially bad in the South. The average caseload for a public defender in Miami-Dade County, Florida, at any one time is 500 felonies and 225 misdemeanors. Well, an HBO documentary premiering at this year's Sundance Film Festival follows three public defenders in states like Georgia that fight the odds to provide their clients with quality representation. This is a clip from the film Gideon's Army that explains just what's at stake.
This is the way it really works. You go to jail. You're charged with an offense based upon what a police officer thinks you did. They set a bond, and if you're poor and you can't make the bond, you don't get out. So you sit, and you sit, and you sit. You may have lost your house. Your kids may be needing sustenance. You may have been taken out of high school. All the things that could happen if you were summarily plucked from your life. You have so much tremendous pressure to plead guilty. It's all about lessening the penalty.
That's an excerpt from the film's title, Gideon's Army, which refers to the landmark Supreme Court case Gideon v. Wainwright in 1963, which will have its 50th anniversary this March. The case involved Clarence Earl Gideon, a poor man from Florida who was convicted of breaking into a pool hall. He couldn't afford a lawyer. None was provided for him when he asked for one at trial. In its decision, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Gideon, finding state courts are required under the Sixth Amendment to provide a lawyer in criminal cases for defendants unable to afford their own. I want to play an audio recording from the Supreme Court's oral arguments. This is from the very end of the hearing, when Chief Justice Earl Warren addressed Abe Fortas, the attorney arguing the case, who is himself a future Supreme Court justice.
Mr. Fortas, before you sit down, I should like to say this. This is a very important case. It's a very fundamental case. It's important to the state of Florida, the state of Alabama, and the other states that have that same rule. It's important to thousands and thousands of poor litigants throughout our country.
That an excerpt from the oral arguments in the Supreme Court 50 years ago. We're joined right now by the filmmakers of Gideon's Army. Well, the filmmaker, Gideon's Army, which premiered at this year's Sundance Film Festival. Dawn Porter is with us. And we're also joined by one of the lawyers that she profiles in this film, Travis Williams, a public defender in Hall County, Georgia. Welcome to Democracy Now! Dawn, talk about why you made this film.
I am a lawyer, and I'd gone to the South I'd met Jonathan Rapping, who is the head of the Southern Public Defender Training Center, and saw the training that was happening in the South for young lawyers. And I was really struck by this group of committed young public defenders who were trying to kind of change the way public defense is practiced in the United States. And I just thought their story wasn't known, and that people would be interested in seeing what was happening.
I mean, the figures are astounding. The U.S. has the largest imprisoned population in the world, what, 2 million people?
2.3 to 2.5.
2.3 to 2.5.
Yes.
The oral arguments we just heard, Talk about their significance and what this ruling, the right to counsel in a criminal case, has meant.
You know, I think we are, as Americans, we are so familiar with the phrase, you have the right to an attorney, that we think it's something that originated with the Constitution. It's actually only 50 years old. So that Supreme Court ruling was incredibly important. I'm so glad that you played that clip. I'm a lawyer. You know, I remember in constitutional law learning about that case. The Gideon decision, Gideon was an indigent person who wrote from prison a handwritten letter to the Supreme Court and said, this isn't fair. And the Supreme Court not only agreed, but they agreed in a unanimous opinion that this is fundamental to the Bill of Rights. And Abe Fortas argued the case, a preeminent Washington, D.C. lawyer, went on to the Supreme Court. It was remarkable jurisprudence, but you know what we're seeing now is that remarkable decision has not been implemented, has not been as effectual as its importance.
I want to go to another of the clips in Gideon's Army. This is Brandy Alexander, a public defender in Georgia, discussing the case of one of her young clients.
He is a kid, and he's facing a lot of time. If he's found guilty, it will break him. Mentally and emotionally, he'll be broken. I can't fathom, I cannot fathom turning around to his mother after a jury has said guilty, and I've told her he's gonna get 10 years, at least, at minimum. She says he's done like a complete 180. He has a job, he's working on his GED, apparently he has this girlfriend. So I think that he's been scared straight, assuming he gets a not guilty verdict and is allowed to live his life. And here's hoping that that's the end result. And we don't see happily ever afters very much in this profession, but hopefully we get us a happily ever after.
Dawn Porter, tell us about Brandy Alexander.
Brandy is a remarkable young woman. She grew up in the South, in a low-income neighborhood, saw a lot of her friends be arrested, and decided she was going to be a lawyer in order to help them. So she's a really empathetic person. She almost feels too much, and I think that I wanted to profile her because I think she breaks the stereotype of the uncaring public defender. Brandy's issue is she cares too much, and so if you care so deeply about what happens, it can really, you know, eat you up inside.
It sounds like there's someone else who cares a great deal sitting right next to you, Travis Williams. Why did you become a public defender in Georgia?
I wanted to, well, I think it's different types of people that do this work, and I'm a fighter. And so I really became a public defender to fight the system, to make sure the police are held accountable, to make sure that the court system is held accountable, to make justice work.
You could make a lot more money as a private attorney. Why aren't you doing it?
I didn't have a lot of money, so I think I'm doing pretty good now. So I'm happy.
Where do you work in Georgia?
In Hall County, Georgia. It's about an hour northeast of Atlanta.
How many cases do you have?
Well, I handle mostly level 1 felonies, rapes, child molestations, things like that. So my numbers are a little lower than other people's, but generally about 100.
And talk about who comes to you, how you're assigned to these cases.
Well, I'm a senior attorney, so I run a courtroom and I supervise about 3 or 4 different people. And so a case comes in, and let's say it's a murder or a child molestation, it comes directly to me. I work the case up from the beginning, and some of the lower level felonies go to my junior attorney, and we just kind of work the cases that way.
You are wearing a sweater. We're here in Park City, Utah, so people can't see something that's very significant about the way you decided to mark your wins and losses. Can you talk about it?
Well, my wins, they go on the wall. I frame them and I put them on the wall. All the verdict
court
sheets.
Decisions, the
yes,
verdict
all
sheets.
The verdict sheets, and I've gotten 5 reversals with the Court of Appeals, so I hang those on the wall too. But I decided that since the wins go on the wall, since I celebrate them so much, that the losses have to go somewhere. So I have a tattoo on my back that says "True Believer," and underneath that it says, "Without a belief held true, we cannot possibly hope to persuade. And then underneath that is the names of the last names of every case that I've lost.
How many names are on your back?
8.
So it hurts even more than the loss when you get these tattoos one by one.
Yes.
That's 8 cases out of how many?
Out of 24.
Wow, that's a pretty good ratio. When was the last time you had one tattooed on your back?
Last week. Last week.
Why are you doing this?
I'm doing this because I think that the system needs somebody that's enthusiastic about keeping it in check, because when I was growing up, I was always harassed by the police, whether it was right or wrong. And so I want to be able to keep them in check. And the only way to do that is through zealous representation.
Dawn, why did you focus on Travis of all the public defenders in the South?
Travis is a unique personality, but I think he's emblematic of the fighter. There are different models of practicing indigent defense, and Travis is a fighter, and so he is relentless. He doesn't give up. Juries appreciate his passion. We had one juror who thanked him, who said, "Innocent until proven guilty. Who knew?" But I think what Travis does is he shows what an effective advocate, what a difference an effective advocate can make, and he's pretty fun to watch. So.
Travis, can you talk about the case that is focused on in Gideon's Army that you represent?
I represented this young kid. When I first got him, he was 19. His name is Brandon Mullen, and he was charged with armed robbery, and it was a very difficult situation because he was so young, and it was a case that really involved $96, but he was facing a potential life sentence. And so it was, and he grew up without parents. The foster care system failed him, and so he was just so sympathetic, but the justice system had no sympathy for him.
The cases that you represent, the one of young men who won because of his braces, describe that case, Dawn.
So Brandy had a client, she calls him young Mr. Wright. His name is DeMontes Wright. And it turns out his mother, a poor woman, had worked really hard to get her kid dental care and had gotten braces and tattoos. And so, most cases do not go to trial. And that's one thing that's incredibly important. So if you have a good lawyer, your case doesn't go to trial, you don't get your day in court. In this case, there was really a misidentification by the police. Because we had a good public defender who insisted on bringing the case to trial, he's exonerated. And one of the key items was that he had braces, and yet braces and it was like almost full body tattoos, and the police report makes no mention of that, and the witnesses didn't remember tattoos, even though they said they
You're talking about tattoos right up his neck,
up his
on
neck,
his
both
face.
sides of his face, all over his arms and hands. And they said this kid frequented the pizza parlor, and yet this wasn't something that they noticed. So the fact that Brandy was a great lawyer, forced the police to actually make their case, made a big difference.
Talk about the significance of what it means to say 90% of people charged with a felony actually plead guilty. They don't go to trial.
They do not go to trial. We have, an FBI statistic is 12 to 13 million people get arrested. So from those people, many millions will be charged. If 90% of those people are pleading guilty, we are funneling people into the prison system. We are not giving them their day in court, which is what the Sixth Amendment,
Why do they plead guilty?
I think particularly in the South, the sentences are so stiff that it's very difficult to look at your client and say, yeah, I'm going to go to trial. It's somebody's life on the line. So people say, oh, 2 years, 3 years, not a big deal. I challenge anybody to spend a day in prison. I filmed in prison. It's incredibly tense, dispiriting place. So when clients are looking at these long sentences, if you're looking at 10 years, you'll take 5 years, even though that's a long time. And then you become a felon with all the collateral consequences to becoming a felon.
Lawyer turned filmmaker. What did you learn in the process, and what were you most surprised by, Dawn, in making Gideon's Army?
I was a civil litigator, and I practiced in a wonderful firm. I had a lot of resources. I had an assistant, I had a paralegal, I had supervision, I had time. These young people are coming out. I had training. You know, there were 2 years.
Is your mouth watering, Travis, or as you listen to the resources?
I had a favorite pen. I mean, so, you know, I came out of law school incredibly, and it was 2 years before I had a case on my own. These young people come out, and this was the most surprising thing to me, and I think I was appalled by this, understanding what, you know, how little I knew when I came out of law school. They are literally, they graduate, they go to their offices, they're handed a file, which is somebody's life, and said, go figure it out. And so I thought, that is not what good representation is, and that can't be what we accept.
The facts and figures in this film. I mean, the average caseload for a public defender in Miami-Dade County, I read this already, I'm going to read it again, in Florida, Miami-Dade County. At any one time, 500 felonies, 225 misdemeanors, 725 cases. How is it possible? If you're working 40 hours, and I know you work more, but 40 hours, this is like 3 minutes a case. How do people deal? How do lawyers deal with this?
Well, you got a lot of people who plead cases out. You have a lot of people who are forced, they don't meet their clients. So, you know, they'll come, they'll meet them for the first time, and they'll be representing them.
And you have a country with 2.5 million people in prison. How do you deal with your own issues, Travis? I mean, your pay, even dealing with student debt. You went to law school.
Well, when it comes to the student debt, I'm fortunate enough to have the Georgia Student Finance Commission to pay my student loans now.
Because?
Because they have this program President Obama has funded, and so I was fortunate enough to apply, and I've won a lot of awards in the state. So sent in my CV because I had been turned down for all these other programs, and they finally accepted me in this program. So it's been a tremendous blessing for me. But when it comes to the work, I work nonstop because it's too many cases, it's too much stuff going on, and you just can't do it in 40 hours.
Final comment, Dawn, about the state of public defenders, and particularly in the South, especially around the issue of racial prejudice.
Mm-hmm. You know, most prisoners, most people arrested are young minority people, and we are creating a permanent underclass. If you do not have zealous representation, if you do not have people like Travis and Brandy who come from these neighborhoods, who see their clients as people and not as statistics or numbers, who care about their lives, we're going to keep funneling and lose a lot of talent.
Well, I want to thank you both for being with us. Travis Williams, a public defender in Georgia, and Dawn Porter, a lawyer turned filmmaker, director of the HBO documentary Gideon's Army, which premiered at this year's Sundance Film Festival, and I hope coming to a theater near you. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, the woman who heads up the documentary track here at Sundance, Kara Mertes. Stay with us.